Hi, boys and girls. Welcome back to Chocolate Fever. I'm going to read chapter 3, Mrs. Kimmelfarber's Problem. And by the way, I loved your flip grids yesterday. You did a great job. And I was thinking the same thing. Too much chocolate. Okay, there was a silence in the room for about 2 seconds. Then there was a riot. All the girls began to giggle. The boys chuckled and laughed right out loud. Henry turned red, and Mrs. Kimmelfarber, who did not appreciate the humor of it all, turned white. She rapped her ruler against the desk and shouted for silence. "Henry Green," she said, "what is the meaning?" "Little brown spots all over," said Henry. "I was looking at my arm and I have these—" "Little brown spots all over," interrupted Mrs. Kimmelfarber. "I heard you quite clearly. But you see, Mrs. Kimmelfarber, I didn't have them all my life. I didn't even have them this morning. But now—" "I know," Mrs. Kimmelfarber sighed. "Now you have them all over. I'd better have a look at them." Taking Henry's arm, she led him to the window. She said as she peered at his arm. "Looks like freckles to me." "No, ma'am," said Henry. "It just can't be." "Why not?" said Mrs. Kimmelfarber. "Because I have clear and delicate skin like my mother." "Is that so?" Mrs. Kimmelfarber said. "And who told you that?" "My father." "Ah," said Mrs. Kimmelfarber. "Exactly. Now you are sure you didn't observe this before this morning?" "If that means did I see them," said Henry, "no, I didn't." "Well then," she said, "you, Henry Green, stand right here, or right where you are. And class," she said, turning to face the room, "you will continue to look at your books until I return." In perfect silence, she added, as she went out into the hall. Henry stood, as told, while the class looked at him. Mrs. Kimmelfarber walked a few steps down the hall to Mr. Pengelow's room. She looked through the doorway and waited until Mr. Pengelow glanced in her direction. Catching his eye, she waved him out into the hallway. "Listen, Phil," she began earnestly. I want you to take a look at this kid." "For heaven's sake, Dolores," said Mr. Pengelow. "I'm right in the middle of Americus Vespucci, who has little brown spots all over his arms." "Little brown spots? You got me out here for little brown spots? I thought maybe measles." "Oh no," said Mr. Pengelow. "Chicken pox? I'd better take a look." The two of them turned Henry to the light near the window, right in the corner where the potted plants were growing, on the little window ledge. Mr. Pengelow poked and prodded and even took— look, there's actually a little picture. Here's the teacher, Mr. Pengelow, and there's Henry. See the little spots on his face? Okay. Mr. Pengelow poked and prodded and even took his eyeglasses out of his pocket and put them on. "Freckles," he said finally. "Just freckles." "Are you sure?" Mr. Pengelow's rounded nose twitched, and he sniffed the air. "Chocolate?" he said. "Have they brought the chocolate milk upstairs already?" "Forget the milk," she cried. "Look, now he has them all over his face." "Oh, no," said Henry. "Oh, yes," said Mrs. Kimmelfarber. "Oh, my," said Mr. Pengelow. "And they weren't there before?" "No. 2 minutes ago, that boy's face was as clear as day. And now—" Henry felt as if his heart were about to drop into his shoes. He swallowed hard and stared at the two teachers who were staring at his face. Little brown spots all over. "And I see more of them coming out even as we speak." A tear, just one, welled up in Henry's right eye, and it began to trickle down his cheek, running slowly in and out of the little brown spots. Can you picture that? Boys and girls, close your eyes for a minute. Just close them. Close your eyes. Think about Henry standing there and the two teachers staring at his face with all the brown spots and the tear trickling down his face. He's feeling very sad. Can you picture that? When you read without pictures in the book and you picture it in your mind, that's called visualizing. Okay, so right now you are visualizing in your mind what this looks like. Okay, great job. All right, I'm actually going to read chapter 4 because these chapters are kind of small. And chapter 4 is called Pop. Dirt breeds germs, Nurse Molly Farthing would often say, and germs have a nasty way of making healthy people ill. Naturally, the infirmary of PS 123, that's the name of the school, was always spotless because Nurse Molly wouldn't have it any other way. And naturally, as Mrs. Kimmelfarber and Henry rushed through the door that morning, she made both of them go back and wipe their feet on the mat. And don't bring any of that cocoa in here, Nurse Farthing added. She sniffed the air loudly. Cocoa? Said Mrs. Kimmelfarber. Don't think I smell it, Nurse Farthing said. Oh, she said, don't think I don't smell it. Please, Nurse Farthing, said Mrs. Kimmelfarber. We have an emergency on our hands. This is Henry Green. He's breaking out in a rash of some sort. So I see, said Nurse Farthing. She sat Henry down in a chair and turned on a bright light. Pushing her spectacles down to the tip of her nose, she bent close to Henry and looked him over. Spectacles are glasses. It's a rash, all right, she said at last. Peculiar. Looks like little brown spots all over. Exactly, Mrs. Kimmelfarber said. But what is it? Have you ever had measles? Nurse Farthing asked. Yes, said Henry, when I was 5. Chicken pox? When I was 3.5. Then I would say you have an unidentified rash. And frankly, I don't like the look of it. Henry, who up until now was merely frightened, began to feel terrified. Nurse Farthing laid her cool hand on his arm and steadied him. There, dear, she said. Nothing to be frightened of. I'm sure it's not serious. How do you feel? Not very good, said Henry. Warm? No. Cold? No. Dizzy? No, said Henry. I just feel strange. You poor dear, said Nurse Molly Farthing. You really must be frightened. She ran his fingers through his hair and patted the back of his neck. Somehow this made him feel a little better. Pop! Did you say something, Nurse Farthing? Said Nurse Farthing. No, ma'am, said Henry. Pop! What is that noise then? She asked. It sounds like something going to pop. See the picture? She's looking at him and see all the words. Pop, 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 pop. I heard it too, said Henry. So did I, said Mrs. Kimmelfarber. Pop, pop, pop. Now they all heard it. The sound of popping filled the infirmary. Little pops, bigger pops, and poppity pop pops kept popping. Henry looked at his arm and in an instant knew where the noise was coming from. His little brown spots were growing bigger and bigger. They were popping out all over him. No longer the size of freckles, they were as big as chocolate bits his mother used for making cakes and cookies. He could feel them popping out on his arms and face, could feel them growing under his shirt. In less than it takes to tell it, Henry Green was covered with little brown bumps and lumps from the top of his head to the tip of his toes. I can't even imagine how he's feeling. I can't even imagine what's going on, but we will find out tomorrow when we read chapter 5, Calling Dr. Fargo. All right? I will see you tomorrow for chapter 5. Have a good day.